Saul, thanks so much. And it's interesting, just with Saul's tip about Mount Royal, that's our university actually gets its name from Mount Royal. It was a young minister who'd come out to Calgary to sort of civilize the West. He'd come from Westmount. That's where his home was, Mount Royal. He said, that's what we're going to call the big hill in Calgary where all our wealthy people live, Mount Royal. And that's where our university got its name. So Saul, we are connected. So first, thank you so much for being here. Just like the airline, I knew you had a choice. This is Monday morning, so to come and even to hear me speak on a Monday morning is just a real honor. It's a privilege to be here. This is a really, I was talking to Betsy earlier on, this is a really special community, the Ed Media community. So what I'm hoping to do, because I see most of you have devices, if I could convince at least a couple of you to get online. I'm just finding more and more my students are bringing their devices to class. So I figure if they're going to bring devices, let's do something together. And I figure we've got so much collective wisdom and expertise in this area that potentially as we go through this, and I was talking to Jenny and John, we're a little random abstract. Hopefully it'll keep me focused as well because we'll have some interesting back channel conversations. So just if you wouldn't mind, it's just that old tinyurl.com. I tried to make it as easy as possible, just the / and EdMedia 2015. That'll take you to the slides, and as we go through, you'll see there's going to be a few prompts for me to learn from you, and I promise, just like I do with get my students to do, at the end of the session, we'll have a summary together that you can share and you can keep using after the session. So here's the plan of attack. I never stand between people and their meals. Sune already knows that. It's been wonderful. I just, again, a shout out to everybody here, but 3 particular people who've been an amazing host for me for the past 2 weeks in South Africa. Just wonderful to have you here, and it's wonderful we can celebrate together in my country, and I can show off Canada a little bit. So the first thing I like to do with, and I think this is important, first session of the conference, I always do this at the beginning of a course, a program, a new semester. I've got a 19-year-old sleeping upstairs. In my mind, I feel like I'm 19, but when I look in the mirror, I realize I'm not anymore. So I think it's really important. I put course outlines together, I tell my students things, but it always seems to go in one ear and go out the other. So the first thing, and what I really want to emphasize throughout this conference, is how important dialogue and conversation is. So what I'd like you to do, hopefully you've made it onto the site, or a lot of you have used this before, today's meet. I'd invite you, just with a partner beside you, or if you can get online, one word, a phrase, whatever. What does student engagement mean to you? Again, I think this is an overused phrase. Our institutions, Saul, are not nearly as old as yours here, especially McGill, sorry to pick on them. But we did celebrate our 105th anniversary, and it's fascinating. We published a book about the history of our institution, and it's a little, every learning plan we've put together has this term student engagement. And again, it's one of those things we assume we know what it means, but again, if we really want to create this sense of community, and as Saul mentioned, not so difficult to create it. The sustaining is going to be the difficult part. So let's start creating it. And I'm just going to go online and see what people have put. So again, just introduce yourself to the person next to you, say hi. Hopefully somebody's got a device. If they don't have one, don't sweat it. Just sit back and relax. But again, a chance to make a friend. Hopefully this will be somebody that you can go for dinner with tonight. Wonderful. I'll definitely go back, yep. We'll keep it up. So yeah, it's just todaysmeet.com, and I tried, Nathaniel, to make it as simple. I tried. You know me, I tried. I'll leave that up. So again, welcome. Come on in, grab a seat. All right. And it's interesting. It's almost like popcorn. You start to hear it die down after a little bit. So wonderful, wonderful. You know, this idea of getting students responsible for them that they actually want. You don't have to tell them to do something. Active participation, construction. Oh, I love this word. I see passion, aware of the process, that metacognition, active learning. Bonjour, right? Montreal student engagement as the start is amazing. Wonderful. So what I like to do when we do this, and again, there's all kinds of tools. You could use Twitter, Today's Meet, is taking the student conversation and actually putting together a document so we actually create our guidelines. I've learned, I taught junior high for a number of years. As soon as I started to tell students to do something, they would see, okay, what's Norm going to do if we cross the line? So rather than creating that we and me stuff, or they and us and them, is how can we work together to create the guidelines? And as many of you are aware, there's actually been a lot of literature about student engagement, and this is a fellow who just lives south of us in a little cabin in upstate New Hampshire. Dennis Litke, I know for the Americans, many of you are familiar with Dennis's work. He's on the Presidential Educational Advisory Committee, done a lot of work with curriculum redesign in the States and Canada. And what I like about Dennis is Dennis follows that KISS principle, keep it simple and straightforward. So just like we have the 3 R's of engagement, Dennis talks about the three R's of education, the 3 R's of engagement. How important is that sense of relevance, creating the connections and the curiosity for our students. That second part, the rigor. A lot of you have probably heard of, Piaget and his work with cognitive dissonance. How important it is to make our students uncomfortable, to create that sense of conflict, to push them out of their comfort zone, so then they've got to assimilate and accommodate, so that sense of challenge. And last but not least, why we're all here, that sense of relationships. How important it is we're learning in an area where we're collaborative and we've got that sense of community. Now, it's fascinating. It's just the buzz is here. We've got 3 national teams here. The Germans came in last night. They're going to be playing the French in the quarterfinals at the end of this week. The French really overwhelmed the Koreans. And I came down the elevator this morning with one of the South Korean coaches, and he said, our headspace wasn't there. We weren't in the zone. And we have to remember to give this guy credit. Chick sent me high. He comes out to Calgary every 4 years to pump up our teams about how important it is to be in a zone. And I saw that in the comments around engagement, is when students lose track of time, they're immersed in what they're doing, they want to do. And a book that's not new to many of you, Dan Pink, the speechwriter for Al Gore when he was the VP of the United States. Kind of interesting. Dan's children goes to Dennis's charter school, bigpicture.org. Also in this book, Dan's got extensive interviews with Chick Sent Me High. And again, how important it is, if we really want students engaged, we've got to turn that locus of control from external to internal. It's the autonomy. They're really taking control for their learning. And again, a famous Canadian author from Kitchener, Ontario, Malcolm Gladwell, a lot of you probably have read The Tipping Point, how it takes time to master something. Malcolm talks about 10,000 hours for the Beatles, all those hours they spent in German pubs, underground pubs, before they became amazing musicians. Hockey, John and I were talking about hockey, Wayne Gretzky in his backyard, 10,000 hours to be a great hockey player, and how important it is to have a sense of purpose. So, John and I were talking, John, about Athabasca. Some of the problems we have in Canada is we have a lot of provincial divisions, and unfortunately, we don't have a lot of national organizations in Canada, but we do have one that's focused on K-12 education. It's the Canadian Educational Association, and every year they survey thousands and thousands of students about what's your sense of flow? Like, how are you engaged with your learning? And what they do is they look at 3 dimensions of engagement. They look at that sense of social engagement. How engaged are you with the extracurricular activities, the debating, the sports, the clubs? And again, academic engagement. I just got both my kids through high school. I know in the States we've got SATs. Just how do I get through the hoops? So that sense of academic engagement, often it's a really superficial approach to learning. Then how do we get to that deeper sense where they're really invested, like, wow, this really has meaning to me? And unfortunately, on every measure of engagement, they've been doing this survey from 1999, and I think most of you, if you have children, you know what these results are going to look like. My apologies at the back, you're not going to see this, but every measure of engagement from grade 6 to graduation in grade 12, it's a downward slope. Attendance, participation in clubs, sense of belonging. John and I come from one of the wealthiest provinces of Alberta, but we have the lowest completion of high school. It's barely 25%. You start going in the rural areas, it's less than 10%. And that's in the wealthiest province in Canada. And you start interviewing students, especially male students, and it's because they don't feel engaged. Their whole sense of confidence has been ruined because there's so much emphasis on that summative standardized testing. So for most of us, a lot of us in Canada, we're engaged in another way of looking at engagement. And I think it is important, though, because at least we're looking at it from the perception of students. How students perceive they're engaged, not just in the class, but out of the class, and how our higher education institutions are creating a supportive environment. It's fascinating. This sea monster, the Nessie, is all over the place. I didn't realize that they do this in Australia and New Zealand. It's called the Aussie, and just I think it's the greatest name in South Africa. They call it the Sassy. It's changed. These are the old benchmarks. They have a new series of engagement indicators, but I still like these ones. This idea of getting the student's sense of how active and collaborative they are in and out of a classroom, the type of quality of interactions they have with us as faculty, that sense of being challenged, not how many books, not how many papers, but how intellectually engaged they are, what sort of experience we provide in terms of work placements, study abroad opportunities, and finally, and the key, our supportive campus environment. So let's just park that for a minute, okay? We'll come back to that. But again, how important it is, I think, whenever we're working on things, is to get the student's perception about what engagement is. Teaching with our mouth shut, really listening to our students. Okay, the next word, and as Saul mentioned, I don't know if it's a claim to fame, just in the right place at the right time, but how many more terms can we come up with? Blended learning, e-learning, m-learning, x-learning, MOOCs, whatever. And again, the second conversation I have with my students, after we're clear about what engagement's going to be in this course or program, we talk about roles and responsibilities. And this is in any mode. And again, I think a lot of us have seen this. We've been involved in online courses, blended courses. Students say, wow, less class time, less work. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Creates so much confusion and so many problems. So just like we did with today's meet, this is another simple tool. Just it's a Google form. I tried to make it as easy as possible if you're not following the sites. It's just the tinyurl.com, edmedia, and norm. So if you just take a moment, just again, I was talking to AJ, going, AJ, the reason he's here is what the hell does this word mean? So again, just feel free to look at your neighbor, talk about it. What does blended learning mean to you? Because again, if we're not clear about blended learning, or we're not clear about the mode of operation in our educational environment, the students are going to be completely lost. So again, just turn to your neighbor. I see some new people coming in. You can talk about where you're going for dinner tonight, but it'd be wonderful if a few of you would actually just go here and talk about blended learning. So blended learning, what does it mean to you? So again, it's just tinyurl.com, edmedia norm. Oh, good. Some conversation. People aren't asleep. Okay. That's good. Go here. Okay. Wonderful. Wow. Okay. This is wonderful. Okay. Let's go Canada. Sorry, we got a little nationalistic here, but we did that. I think, Nathaniel, I think that's one of the few times that we've actually made it to the quarterfinals in a World Cup. Ever. We're excited. So again, this Canada, this to me is a sense of engagement now. People talking, and again with me, a lot of my background, I'm a geologist, I did a lot of corporate training. I'm not used to losing control. And I think that's something we're going to talk about in a minute in terms of really giving more control in our educational experiences to the learner. thank you so much for a number of people doing this, because often again, and you know, blended learning, we think of face-to-face and online learning, but I see all kinds of other wonderful things about in terms of integrating different types of learning approaches, different types of technologies, all kinds of mixing old and new in an inspiring way. I put some on mine, yeah, not sure. I'm still not sure. Learning in multiple modes, multiple access. So again, this is important, and I really want to emphasize that from my perspective, one size doesn't fit all, and that's important. But when we're engaged in an educational experience, it's really important that us and our learners are clear about what the experience is going to be all about, because this is where a lot of confusion is created. As Saul mentioned, I was fortunate to work with Randy Garrison. John, I have to give a shout out because he did retire last week. A lot of you know Terry Anderson. Terry is still Randy's favorite doctoral student. I've always been number 2 in life, but we just had Terry retired last week. He was our federal chair in open and distance learning here. A lot of this came out of work that I've done with Randy, and the only 2 things that I sort of remember out of the book is, one, that again, it's not prescriptive, just like John Dewey. A lot of us teach the same course, and we may teach 3 sections. And it's amazing because those 3 sections are completely different. The modality may be the same, 3 sections online, but every section is unique because of the students in it. The other thing, and you're going to hear it over and over, and I think that's one of the new SIGs that's going to be created, is around learning design. How important design is. Again, this isn't bolting more technology on, more ways of learning. This isn't creating a huge onion where we can't see the forest through the trees. This is going back to basics, the design. Now, it is interesting, and I got to give a shout out to Mike Power. I don't think Mike can make it. Mike's the chair of educational technology at another institution, one of our oldest institutions, Laval University up in Quebec City. I know, Betsy, you had a chance to visit that beautiful city, the city where I got married. But some of these are taken from Mike. And again, for us, John, sorry, but we do have sort of that Oxford-Cambridge tradition. When we think of education in the Western sphere, we often think of the UK, and we think of those beautiful old lecture halls, and everybody, John, has heard me tell this joke. I remember going to Oxford in the year 2000. They were so excited. It was the Y2K, and they were telling me every room was going to be wired. And I said, great, Wi-Fi? They said, no, we're going to have plugins in the year 2000 in Oxford. But anyway, that rich sense of what we're doing and why we come to these AACE conferences, just that sense of that electromagnetic aura, that we're all together and we're communicating face to face. When I think of the Open University of the UK, and John, you're going to hear a lot of plugs for Athabasca. When we think of Athabasca, which did start in the 70s, but in the 90s with computer mediated communication, learn anywhere, anytime. And then I've got to give a shout out to some more Canadians. Does anybody in this audience remember something called WebCT? Yes, excellent. I'm talking to, it's the converted. But remember, that was Murray Goldberg, an Albertan originally from Edmonton, UBC, the homebrew server. But for me, that was almost the advent of sort of our modern conception of blended learning, about the ability to really intentionally integrate what was going on in a classroom and outside of the classroom with these course management, these learning management systems. Unfortunately, it often became a course and a half syndrome. We had something going on in the LMS and something going on in the classroom, and the two never met. Recently, and again, there's a long history of using the phone. I don't want to say this is anything new, but a lot of us are doing a lot of synchronous web-based conferencing. So now we can start to do blended online learning. And this is Mike Power's big stick, is how we can combine synchronous and asynchronous learning environments and combine them. And I just want to give a real big shout out for our Assembly of First Nations in Canada. A lot of you probably work with Indigenous people in your areas. This is a group that I work with in Alberta. It's the Sunchild e-learning community. And it's just wonderful to see their type of blended learning. And what they're doing is they're combining on-the-ground learning with online learning. So in Alberta, again, we've got all these petrol dollars. We also have a lot of what we call reserves. We've got a lot of Indigenous people on reserves throughout our province. Thanks to these oil companies, we've been able to put a lot of money into these reserves. The first thing we needed to do was find a safe place for people. We build these things called ATCO trailers. So we moved all these ATCO trailers onto the reserves. The second thing we did, we worked with the oil companies to get high-speed internet access, so we've got satellite internet access. And the third and the most important thing was to get a local leader, to get somebody on the ground who understood the issues, the challenges of the learners on the ground, and then working with a group of old online teachers like me, we can come in and support. So we're using Moodle as our platform, Adobe Connect is our synchronous, and we work on 1-week modules, because all of us, as we know, how important it is to get that sense of accomplishment, that sense of self-confidence. So we work primarily with Indigenous people, getting them their high school degrees on a 1-week module basis. So they work with their local mentor, they work with the online teachers. At the end of the week, they submit the assignments. Then Monday, we sit down virtually and face-to-face, review what worked and what didn't work. And we've now got an 80% completion rate, which is making a huge just difference on the reserves in Alberta in terms of empowering people and also in terms of creating a lot of local businesses. Because one of the side things that we found out of this is around e-commerce. And I'm going to tease the Europeans, especially the Germans, but a lot of Europeans love to purchase a lot of our Indigenous handiwork in terms of the paintings, the carvings. So it's really created, in some cases, a sustainable business on some very remote parts of our province in Alberta. Okay, let's keep moving. So again, we're going to have conversations about this for those of you who want to stay after the break, but really it is in the design. It's not about a quasi-experimental study trying to figure out is online better than face-to-face, what does blended, but how do we intentionally design to integrate what's the best for the synchronous, and again, it's not always face-to-face, but that sense of energy, and how do we integrate that with the asynchronous environment? Been a lot of studies. Unfortunately, we haven't done as many as we should have in Canada, but a lot of studies about blended learning in terms of creating those communities of learning in terms of effectiveness, the efficiency, and for a lot of our commuter campuses in Montreal, people travel great distances to come to the universities, the access and the convenience. Again, we've seen this study. It was done 5 years ago by Barbara Means, the Stanford Research Initiative, SRI. When you talk to Barbara, she really emphasized it's not the modality that made the difference and how difficult it was for her to do this meta-analysis. Most of the studies, the methodology was flawed, but she said it wasn't the modality, it was the intentional design. Some of you know that she put out a book last spring, and she allowed me, if you don't want to buy the book, the executive summary is linked to that PowerPoint. But what she did, she reflected on the work that she and Louise Yarnell, the work that they've been doing for a number of years at SRI, and you know, this idea that if we're going to do it, it's not going to happen overnight. And a lot of us have been involved in innovation, and it takes 4 to 7 years for innovation to come to fruition. And again, I think that's a frustration for a lot of us designers, is we work with faculty, and again, it doesn't work the first time. And that's what life's like. It's an iterative process over and over and over. We're always learning as we redesign our courses. So again, it's not one size fits all, and it's not like we get it perfect the first time. A lot of you are familiar with the work of the cat, Carol Ann Twigg. Carol's been around for a number of years, and again, if you aren't familiar with her work, I really encourage you to view it. She's got wonderful case studies. If you're working with a provost or senior administration who's really reluctant about open, online, blended learning, some wonderful case studies to demonstrate that it really can make a difference, not only for student learning, but for us as faculty. So, our role, faculty, we talk about this idea of student-centered learning. We talk a lot about students, and rightly so. We are working with students, but this isn't about student-centered learning. This isn't about teacher-centered learning. This is about creating learning-centered environments. Again, engaged teachers equal engaged students. So this is a conversation that I think very few of us have had with each other, with departments. But we talk, again, a lot about the roles and the responsibilities of students, as we should. We want them to take responsibility for their learning. But this is a complex environment. There's a lot going on now. You know, subject matter experts, there's all these tools, there's design. So again, one last chance. We're going to make sure this is going to work out perfect in terms of time. This is a tool that's not going to work perfect. A lot of you have used it, Padlet. It's almost like sort of a virtual whiteboard. I think they're going to time me out about 50 users. So again, first one on, you get on. But again, what I'd like you to do, just with the person beside you, you don't need to be online if you don't want to be, But what if we are going to create a really powerful learning environment, what are our key roles? We can't do everything. So what are our core roles? What are going to be our core roles? And then what are we going to have to, who are we going to have to partner with? Who are we going to have to work with? So just take a moment, just with your partner, one last think, pair, share. Roles of a successful teacher in any sort of digital mediated environment. So over to you, 5 minutes. Go for it. Your chance to talk, conversation, let's hear it. I know it's Monday morning, but let's go and we'll get another coffee. I promise, 25 minutes to the next coffee. Let's go for it. Okay. Always the time. Oh, wow. Wow. There are assess, put on the learner's shoes. Okay. Let's go Alouettes. It's football time, or Canadian football time here. This, I've really got to give a shout out to you. This is wonderful. I've done this before in a lot of audiences, and nobody uses the technology, but it does make sense. This is an Ed Media conference. And again, this is always going to be difficult because now that I've got the group talking, everybody, this is terrible. And again, they talk about Canadians' pathological politeness. I'm sorry, but I want to make sure we get to coffee. But again, this is the beauty of an online or a blended learning environment because we can continue the conversations on beyond our synchronous time. So the one thing I notice when I do this is just how many different roles and responsibilities. It's amazing. We've got cheerleading there. We've got the ability to walk in the learner's shoes. We've got role model, organizers, the person, the catalyst to make it happen, team builder, inspiration, shoulder to cry on. It's so complex. But what we have to remember is there are only 24 hours a day and 7 days in the week. And if we're going to make this work, one of the things we're going to have to do is help the students take on more and more of these roles and responsibilities as we go through a course and a program. So if we scaffold it properly, we put ourselves out of a job at the end of the experience. So let's just have a look at what some of the other people have said. And again, just another shout out to Athabasca. This is work that Terry Anderson did in the 90s. And it's really fascinating. There was 3 of them. There was Terry Anderson, Walter Archer, and Randy Garrison. And they all worked at the University of Alberta, which is one of our largest universities in Edmonton. And they'd go for coffee every Friday and talk about things. And that's where that community of inquiry framework came out of. It was out of lunchtime conversations. And again, how important regular dialogue is. But I really want to give Terry a lot of credit. And what he did, he looked at the different types of models or roles and responsibilities for teachers in computer-mediated communication environments, CMC environments. So we've got Zane Burge and Bob Mason from the States, A lot of you are familiar with the work of Morten Poulsen up in Scandinavia, and then there's their work on the end. And you know, we often hear that phrase about sort of a guide on the side versus a sage on the stage. And I think for most of us know, it's not black and white, that the roles and the responsibilities are situated. They depend on the needs of the learners, and they depend on where we are in the course if we're going to sustain those communities. So this is Terry's work. He did a lot of this with Liam Rourke. But what I like is he really emphasized this idea of teaching rather than teacher presence, so that it's a shared responsibility. Ultimately, we're the captains of the ship, but we need to have everybody rowing to make the ship move. So again, how important it is that we've got a plan, we've got a design, but how important is the organizational component, the flexibility. Again, I'm going to criticize myself. I'm old school. I'm very prescriptive. I'm not linear, but I'm a prescriptive. I spend a huge amount of time with my upfront design, and then I get really upset when the students don't engage in my design. So again, it takes two to tango. How important it is to have an initial design, but make it flexible so that we can respond to the needs of our learners. Facilitating discourse, as we know, isn't about being on the guide on the side. It's about us modeling what we want engaged learners to be. It's for us to be actively engaged in the course as a learner. So we're a role model for the students about the type of conversations, the type of engagement we want. Again, we are the captains of the ship. I have my 19 and my 21-year-old with me right now, but I'm more than twice as old as them. So, you know, I may not know a lot of things, but I know a lot of people, and I know, based on my experience, my wisdom, I know when there's misconceptions, I know when there's issues, I'm learning from my students, but I am the captain of the ship. And I think for most of us, especially when we're teaching first and second year, it's diagnosing misconceptions. Students come to us, especially out of high school, with a lot of preconceptions about the world, and our real role is to challenge those preconceptions and really open their mind. So those different three roles. I do want to emphasize that this isn't new, and I really don't like the way this turned out in terms of the 7 principles. This has nothing to do with Art Chickering and Zelda Gampson's work about the 7 principles of good practice in higher education. But again, as Betsy mentioned, we'll have time for a conversation. But again, how important it is we intentionally design not only to create a sense of trust and community, but this is an academic space. This isn't a social space. This is an academic learning space, and we're designing for that. How important it is that we create opportunities to not only create, but to sustain it. And again, nothing's new here. We know Tuckman's, the forming, storming, norming, and performing. But again, most of our students have had no formal experience with group work. We need to scaffold the experience for them. And again, we need to make sure we inject conflict. We need to make sure that they move beyond just this exploration, that they actually start to integrate what they're learning into practice, into their life. And again, how important it is that we align our outcomes with the way that we're assessing students. Really, really focusing on how we're redesigning the assessment activities. And again, just want to emphasize, this isn't new. I think we've got some wonderful people with us from New Zealand. I see some smiles there. Again, anytime I get a chance to go to New Zealand, I'm there. Pick me. I'm teasing, but it's an amazing set of 2 islands there. But again, in the Maori language, there isn't a word for teach. There isn't a word for learn. It's ako, and that's the National Teaching and Learning Organization, ako Aotearoa, that we learn to teach, we teach to learn. And again, a lot of you know this famous Kiwi, New Zealand Kiwi. Unfortunately, it sounds like he's left Auckland. He's at the University of Melbourne now. John Hattie, he's done a lot of work around visible learning and visible teaching. And again, just like the comments you made, how important it is that we see learning from our students' perspective, but how important it is to create those conditions where students start to see themselves as their own teachers. They're really taking responsibility. Okay, we've got 10 minutes or about 15 minutes here. Nice stuff, Norm, all kinds of talking. We've got some incredible sessions coming up. I know the invited session is going to be MOOCs analytics. My apologies, I'm just going to talk a little bit about baby analytics. I'm just beginning in this field. So a famous quote from Herb Simon, who's often considered to be the father of artificial intelligence down in Pittsburgh. that if we're going to make a difference, we got to open up our doors, we got to open up our LMS systems. The world is open, but the most important thing is we've got to start documenting what we're doing, documenting and sharing. And again, that's the importance of a conference like this, is developing those international collaborations and partnerships so that we're discovering what's going on in different contexts in different ways. So here we go. Just this is my little case study here. So again, as I mentioned, engagement's important. So I have learned over time, in order for me to continue to get funding from the provost's office, whatever I do needs to be directly aligned with the vision, with the strategic plan of my institution. So my institution is heavily focused on this idea of increasing students' perception of how they're engaged at the institution. So there's another set of tools. So it's Judy Wymette, who's in charge of the questions for the National Survey of Student Engagement, but she's got a wonderful partner, Bob Smallwood, who's at the University of Alabama, and I know a lot of you are familiar with this tool. It's the CLASSE tool, so the Classroom Survey of Student Engagement, very, very, very easy to deploy for both students and faculty, but it's wonderful to get the students' perception of what's going on in their environment on campus or off campus. So what we did is we took 7 of our first-year courses. These are courses traditionally where students have had a real challenge. And again, my area, I'm a geologist, so I'm in the natural sciences, but students for some reason wrestle with a lot of our natural science courses, the biology courses, the mathematics courses, the statistics courses. So what we did, we took these 7 courses where students unfortunately have some serious challenges, and we decided to redesign them. And we decided not only to redesign them, but to provide a lot of support to go through 3 iterations of the design. And we did this in partnership with administration. So the nice, cute fellow with the apple is my dean, and the woman in the center there is a student. So we had a student at administrative perception, and then we worked closely with these 7 faculty members. And here's what we did. We started with online surveys. We found that the CLASSE didn't quite have what we needed, so we got permission from EDUCAUSE to use a few of their items from the eCar survey, and we put those together and administered it to both the students and the faculty. Fiona did a lot of work with the students, and again, I know in my heart I feel like I'm 19, but when I do a student focus group, it all just seems to be wonderful. The students always tell me what I want to hear, whereas when you do a student-to-student focus group, they'll tell students, I think, things a lot more honestly than they'll tell me. And again, a lot of us are using the different LMSs. We'll hear wonderful sessions about all kinds of different ways that we can be intentionally collecting data through using the LMSs and all kinds of other digital tools, and we had instructor focus groups. So here's we go. Again, I really want to emphasize these are correlations. These aren't cause and effects. Most of this is intuitive, but again, senior administration loves to see this. So on the x-axis, these are how students perceive that they're active and collaborative in the course environment, and that's in maybe a face-to-face classroom and outside. So those students who perceived that they were more engaged in the class, active and collaborative, were also the ones that were more successful. And again, it's intuitive, can't say it's cause and effect. We're actually looking at this over the 4-year program because we can start to see the dips and lows, because who knows, maybe it was the most engaged students coming in and the most engaged coming out. All of us, many of us are using LMSs, Moodle, Sakai, whatever, and again, I'm so excited. I'm going to learn a lot here because I really know very little about learning analytics, but just the capability of collecting data as students move through. I know that Sune, we're going to have a great one on eye tracking here. It's amazing the different things that we can do with students in terms of collecting data. For us, we're using Blackboard, very simple way to collect tool, just the frequency of visits, and again, those students that were more frequently visiting the LMS were also the ones that were more successful. We drove down a little deeper though, because that's a pretty superficial way of looking at engagement. So we started to look at correlating the student's sense of engagement with the eCar questions, how they were actually using the technology, what were they doing with it in terms of communication and collaboration. And this is where we started to get some really rich correlations. Again, correlations, not cause and effect. Few more slides here. This, again, I'll be honest, probably the most powerful way for us to promote, to advocate for students to engage in different learning experiences is peer-to-peer. We can put marking material up, we can do everything, we can tweet things out, we can create a Facebook, but how powerful it is when students talk to other students. And what we liked about it, it just, it wasn't a nice course to do. But the students felt that faculty were really using the digital tools in a way that was appropriate for them to learn. And in terms of the assessment, that's really where we focus the redesign. And again, we'll talk more about that after the break. And that they would recommend for other students to take this course. And again, for us, this is really what's driving just the huge increase in the online and the blended learning courses at my institution, is the students' satisfaction with them. And they're satisfied because they feel that it's a more intense learning experience for them. In terms of effective aspects, this came out of the student focus groups. And again, I think this is important for us, for faculty, to hear, because I think I'm like all of you. Curiosity killed the cat. I'm so excited to come to this conference and learn about new tools and ways to do things. But my students have said, pause. What you need to do is first check in with us. What devices, what are we using? Why don't we leverage the tools we're already using? Second, this idea of potentially separating academic from personal spaces. Believe it or not, I'm sure a lot of us are similar to me. I really am not that big on our learning management system, but our students say it may be not great, but it's a common portal. It's a consistent place for us to find out what's going on. So this idea of Blackboard Plus, we've got the LMS, and then we may hook all the collaborative tools to it, but they know where to get the tools. The other thing I was really impressed with was students' understanding of the importance of learning how to work collaboratively, not just face-to-face, but virtually. I think most of us, that's the way we work. I work primarily from my home now, using tools like WebEx or GoToMeeting. How important it is for students to learn how to work effectively and efficiently in these virtual learning environments. Last but not least, the more technology around us, the more the need for a human touch. Humans aren't going anywhere. So students, again, they not only appreciated that we were the subject matter experts, we are the discipline experts. That's why we're at these institutions, but also our desire to help them succeed, not to dumb things down, but really to see the environment from their perspective. The other thing that I find is how important it is that we hear from the students about what's working and what's not working. And again, this is where we can open a dialogue. We don't shut it down. Often as faculty, when we get criticism, the hairs go on the back of our necks, we get excited, and we just want to challenge students and tell them why they're wrong. But again, it's a meeting of two ways. We can learn a lot from student feedback. And one of the biggest challenges I think students face, and especially in our country, is moving from our high school system, which is a 6-month semester, to a university semester, which is only 4 months. Yes, it is fast-paced. Yes, it is a lot of work. And I'm looking forward to a lot of sessions about reading, because I think this is what we really have to do a better job of, is first and second year courses, is really demonstrate to students and get them so they want to read. Create some real controversial issues in our courses so they want to go to those primary sources. They're excited about close reading. They just don't want to scan documents, they want to read closely. The other thing I think, again, that's so important for us, and they say it's a fine line between being in a groove and a rut. I've taught courses for 15 years. It makes perfect sense to me. Why don't you get it? How important it is when we're doing redesign work that we work with our students. So if it's undergraduates, let's work with the 3rd and 4th year students who've just recently taken our course. We can work in partnership with them because, again, what's clear for us is often not clear for them. They can help us with the language, they can help us with the way that we're designing the navigation in our LMS systems. And last but not least, and again, we have a new government. It's going to be wonderful, John, it's going to be amazing. It's incredible. We have gone from the right to the left in Alberta, and I'm hoping that we can start to make changes, because it does take a village to raise a student, and the whole system has to work together. And right now, we have a huge emphasis on test taking in our K-12 system, so students come conditioned in university to please us. They have no idea how to learn, no idea about metacognition. That's our job. So with that, look at that, we're right in time. Just one last website for you to grab. I'd really encourage you to grab that. It's a Google Doc where what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the different conversations we've had. I'm going to try and summarize them and put them in this area. So thank you again for your time. We do have about 5 minutes. Does anybody have a burning question? There's usually somebody who's seen me previously who wants to just see how I'll respond to a really controversial question or anything like that. I feel like Ferris Bueller. Anybody? Anybody? Thank you, Saul. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is an amazing presentation. My most immediate question goes back to a little bit back. You said it takes 7 years to get it right.
It does.
How do you come up with that number?
Well, and I'll bring it. It's stuff I actually got, Saul, from the Conference Board of Canada. They've actually got stuff on their website there now because, Saul, that's an issue. And again, you've had way more than I do. But you look at, yes, you have. You are the man. Just for us in Canada, we have this thing called the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC grants. And they're often on a 3-year funding cycle. And Saul, how many times have you been on a grant? You're just getting it? I mean, we're just moving from sort of the prototype to the implementation, and the funding's over. So Saul, I'll make sure I put this on this because I was at another session, and there's a woman here from Penn State, and it was Larry Reagan who was talking at their global campus at Penn State, that it takes, and it's 4 to 7, so not always 7, but 4 to 7 years to really to get the innovation to get it going. Saul, that was an easy one. Come on, we have to have a more difficult one than that. All right, here we go. So what can we do to engage teachers? To empower teachers? And again, be careful. This is my experience. So what works for me may not work for you. But I find in order to empower and engage students, if you're involved in any sort of faculty development activity, design it so it's the faculty get to experience this from the student perspective. That was the most powerful thing for me. I remember way back when I was doing my doctorate, doing an online course, and it was a terrible course. I won't mention the person who did it because they may be in the room, but it gave me such a powerful way of learning what worked and didn't work. The second thing I think you really want to emphasize to faculty is don't do it alone. We've really got to start working in partnership, and I'm going to be careful because I know we have a lot of designers here, and I've got an instructional design background. The problem I found with lots of our design teams is they are really hierarchical. I think we've got to start working more in partnership with our faculty to demonstrate that when they work with us in terms of multimedia, instructional design, library services, it's actually a benefit for them. We're helping them with their workflow. So I think that's the big way that we empower faculty is to demonstrate how we're going to work in partnership with them. I know at a lot of institutions in terms of a lot of online courses, one of the two key groups has been the librarians, embedded librarians, working in the courses and student learning services. So I'd really emphasize the partnership. Anybody? One more? We're good? Well, again, thanks so much. I really appreciate you being here. I know it's first thing in the morning. We've got a whole wonderful slew of sessions. I believe that it's starting right now. I see it. It's just going to be coffee out here from 9:30 to 10. All kinds of wonderful sessions after that. And if there's other people, if you want to come back at 10 o'clock, we'll do a discussion specifically around the design of this. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have an amazing conference and an amazing time in la belle ville de Montréal. À la prochaine. Okay.